So, hello again. Welcome to another episode of the Franchise Everything podcast, where we talk about everything and anything franchising. And we're coming to you live today, live streamed and live audience from the Franchise Expo in Melbourne. And we're joined once again by the esteemed franchise accountant, Peter Knight. Hello, Peter.
G'day, Glenn. Great to be here again. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Been a good show?
It's been a great show.
Fantastic. Same for us. Having a good time.
Excellent, excellent. And we're going to talk this one about yesterday. We did calculations. So Peter is the franchise accountant, and we did the calculations yesterday on how to work out the profitability of a new, or what we call greenfield franchise in franchising. That's it, a brand new one. This time, we're going to do some magic maths from the accountant on a resale or existing franchise. That's a franchise that's already been operating, and now you've got some existing figures and how we value it and how brokers work with it and everything. So, Peter, take it away.
Great. What we love about this is with an existing business, we've already got some figures from the previous owner. So we've got something to work with. So, for instance, they'll have some financial statements will show a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. So two separate documents form part of what's called the financial statements.
And this is all part of if you're looking at a franchise, this is all part of your due diligence. So you get this, you see the listing, you might see the listing for sale for $300,000 on a website. And then you're trying to figure out, and that $300,000 thing has come to with a magical way. How do they come up with the listing price?
They come up with this figure, and it's usually based on, there's two components to it. What was the profit last year or the last couple of years times what they call a multiple, which is this magic figure. So we start with a profit times a multiple equals the value. That's where we come up with a value. So there's two moving parts to this.
Yeah, and I know a lot of, and franchising, I suppose it's a bit of an advantage at time. Franchise brokers would talk about a typical franchise, or they would go by brand, that this brand gets a 2.5 times multiple, this brand gets a 5 times multiple. Do you hear a lot of that sort of stuff quite often? Yeah,
we hear those sort of things. This multiple becomes the magic number because it can be in the range 2.5 to 3. What that really means is we're expecting the profit of the business to repay the purchase price in 3 years, if it's a 3. We want the profit to repay in 2 years, if it's a 2. So you reverse it to work out how long it'll take you to pay back that purchase price.
And if it doesn't do that, you've either done something really wrong or the multiple was wrong.
Or the multiple's wrong, or you're paying too much for the business, in which case we'd say, have a look around. There may be alternate investments for around about the same price.
Okay, so let's figure out, you're going to take us through a calculation here on the board there on figuring out profit and the real profit. And this is generally like, you have a lot of dealings, interactions with franchise brokers, isn't it? So, and there's always to and fro between the accountants about what the profit is.
What the profit is, because the profit is one of the two figures. We've got profit times multiple equals value. So they're the only two things that move. So we want to make sure those numbers, that we've got confidence that they're the right figures that we should be talking to. So
Okay,
look at this now.
Go for it. Show us.
So for instance, we'll get a profit and loss statement from the previous business, and just in this example, let's call it $100,000. So the figures that the previous accountant has come up with show a profit of $100,000. We'd want to check that against the tax return as well, that we've declared that to the tax man. But there may be some things in those figures that are legitimate tax-related expenses, so that's okay, but they might not relate to that business. So the term we use is add back. We add those expenses back. So you'll see here that we've called them add backs. So what that means is there's some expenses in the figures that don't relate to the particular business, but they might be legitimate tax deductions. So for instance, in this case, we're saying excess wages, 25 grand. So what that might be is, for instance, if we wanted to pay a manager to do the role, maybe that role's worth 80,000, but we paid the owner, maybe he took out 105,000 in this case. So he took out more from the business than that role was worth. It was only worth 80, but he took out 105. So we want to add back that excess wage.
To add the valuation up into the business.
Now, because of that wage, there's also some extra super that was paid on that. So we think, well, that's probably an add back. Now, we saw through here, he did a research trip overseas and had some travel expenses.
Which wasn't really necessary to the business operation.
Well, we're saying
for tax
from
purposes
a tax
it was.
purposes
Yeah,
it
of
was.
course.
So
Yeah.
we did some travel for the business, that for the overall for the development of the business, but it didn't relate to the specific operations of that location.
Hmm.
So it was 15 grand's worth of expenses there. So that's an add back as well. So we total up these add backs and it comes to $43,000 worth of add back.
Yep.
We add that back and the profit has gone from 100 to a profit of 143,000, just in that example.
So that's becomes very significant, doesn't it, when you start looking at multiples?
Yeah. If, for instance, the multiple was 2, we'd say, based on that figure, the value of the business was 200,000.
Mhm.
All of a sudden down here, we're up to nearly 300,000.
Mm.
That's a big difference. And can we support it by looking at those figures? I'd say, yeah, that makes sense.
So how contentious does what becomes an add back become? Talk us through
Absolutely.
what do people stretch it to? What have you seen people try and stretch it to?
Yeah, we've seen them stretch where they're saying, well, we want to add back way more expenses than is probably reasonable. So, for instance, somebody might argue, well, we want to add back a lot more expenses for wages to make that add back greater. Someone might want to argue, well, that's an extra 45 or 50,000 add back. Somebody might say, well, I want to add back my motor vehicle. I've got motor vehicle expenses there. I want to add those back. And bit by bit, you'll see that we're adding a whole lot of things back that may be stretching it a bit. The reason why they do it is to increase the adjusted profit because that adds to the value of the business that they're looking to sell.
And so business brokers are driving this, aren't they? Generally.
Yeah. I'd say so. And the objective is to get a realistic value of the business. So by adding back some of these expenses, it's a valid experience to be done.
Yeah, and I'm not having to go at business brokers with it because, of course, their role is to get maximum sale price for their vendor. So they play a real role in that.
Yeah. Our role then as accountants is to probably challenge each figure and say, verify, is that really a valid add back? Because from the purchaser's point of view, the purchaser doesn't want to pay more than it's worth. We understand that's the tension there between a buyer and a seller. The seller wants to maximize how much they can get from the sale of the business. The purchaser wants to pay a fair price, but not too much over.
So is this part of the add backs, has this become the biggest point of contention in most existing franchise sales that you see?
Yeah, we're seeing it a lot. We're seeing two areas. We're seeing rent. The rent on a sale of a business, the landlord might want to take that opportunity to bump the rent up. That starts getting outside anybody's control. That's dealing with a third party. But when we're dealing with the sale of a business, these will be the areas that become an area of contention.
Yeah. And also, can you touch on a bit in the resale of an existing franchise, the way you're approaching as an accountant, franchise agreement terms and refit and lease terms?
It's a good one. We've got a case on this right now that we're working on with a client. There's a clause in the franchise where the franchisor is requiring their franchisee to renovate the premises. They've been there for 7 years. The franchisor is saying it's starting to look a bit tired. We need to freshen it up. And so they need to spend $120,000 to renovate the franchise. They wanted to sell. And so they had this choice. They were in a tough situation where if they did not do the renovation, the person coming in to buy that business, they'd have to do the reno. And so immediately that would become a point of negotiation. The buyer would say, well, hang on a minute, I'll buy your business, but I also have to then spend $120,000. So what ended up happening in that case, we've just finalised it now with our client. The client decided to do the reno themselves.
Yep.
They've renewed the lease and they've renewed the franchise as well. They're going to run it for maybe another year, get some trading figures under their belt, and then they're going to put it on the market for sale.
And then it becomes that refit cost becomes a non-issue to the sale.
Non-issue. It's already done.
It's just another bit of friction in the sale that's not necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, we don't need to do it. So this becomes important when we're looking at the timing of the sale. Have a look on the horizon. What big expenses are coming up? There's another thing we'd look at. would be any of the equipment. Is some of the equipment starting to look tired, or are we spending a lot of repairs on, spending money on repairs and maintenance when maybe we need to replace the equipment? If we're going to replace it, get it done so that the buyer who comes in, everything's in place. They're not coming up for big expenses onboarding.
Yeah, and it's the same with franchise agreement, isn't it? So if you want to look at the term of the franchise agreement on a resale as well?
Yeah. With our franchise agreement, we see two things happen there. Either, option one, they'll transfer the existing franchise agreement. Probably most common though, the franchisor will say, let's finish with the old one. I won't say tear it up, but we'll
Do a whole
replace
new
it
one.
and start with a brand new agreement.
So what role do you play in this in helping people to buy? So where are you normally finding people come to you with resales? And there's probably a slightly different attitude, is it, in this? Do you find people come to you saying, I definitely want this business, I'm having this regardless? Or do you find because of the presence of real trading numbers, it makes it a bit more of a numerical type decision?
It's a great question. Because we've got real numbers, that's what we're working with.
Yep.
And so then it becomes a matter of arithmetic, really. This is the process that we go through. We might argue, be toing and fro, what are the add backs? Once we've got the add backs, we come up with the profit. Then the next argument will be the multiple. 2, 2.5, 3 times. I have to say, since COVID, when as accountants, we're not seeing multiples much greater than 3.
So you think that that's really had an effect in the market since then?
It's come down. Yeah, the resale value has been hit a bit. And also we're seeing in this current environment, cost of living crisis, the appetite for people buying, there is definitely pressure and the availability of funds to pay a higher price. So this multiple, the number that we're multiplying profits by, is being challenged.
Are you seeing it easier in this environment when you talk about those sorts of factors in being able to get deals done for new versus existing franchise sales? Is it what are you seeing get through in finance? Existing with numbers, obviously.
Existing. The banks like confidence. They like seeing something that's hard and realistic. But yet, again, the banks are happy to lend. Even in a tougher environment, there's serviceability criteria they're testing. And certainly if the purchaser has got real estate, they're okay.
Good to go. All right. That's great information. Again, thanks, Peter, the franchise accountant, as always. Where can people contact you if they want to?
Yep, thefranchiseaccountant.com.au.
Great, and I highly advise you to do that. If you're looking at investing in a franchise, especially with your pre-purchase reviews, they're fantastic to take you through all sorts of details of the franchise. Thanks again for joining us, mate. Much appreciated.
Thanks, mate. Enjoy the show.
And that's it again for another episode of the Franchise Everything podcast. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, please share, like, subscribe, do all that sort of stuff so more people can have better businesses, better lives, and be happier in everything that they do. We'll catch you in the next one.